Now that we have briefly taken a look at the iNotify property change interface, it's time for us to implement the interface. And we're going to be doing it on two classes that are directly bound to the view. Now, not actually bound yet, but we have to bound them. We are currently creating posts from the new travel page. And we have an event handler from where we are creating a post like this. We are currently accessing the value from the entry and assigning it to the experience. And the same is happening in the register page, where we are creating a user by accessing the email and the password. So maybe with the iNotify property changed, our code behind can look a little bit cleaner. And because we're talking about the user and the post classes, these are the classes that have to implement the interface. So I'm going to start with the post class. And we're going to implement the interface. Remember that to do that, all we have to do is write colon and the name of the interface. You may not find the name of the interface listed because we don't have a reference to its namespace, but we can add a using directive to system.component model to solve this. Then we have to implement the interface. And all we have to do is type Ctrl dot or Alt Enter on Mac on our keyboards and select the option to implement the interface. What this will do is add the only member that comes from the interface, which is a public event called property changed. But this is everything it does. This is not yet ready for us to know when the value from a property changes. Remember that for that, we have to implement some functionality inside of the setter of the properties. And the functionality that I want is that I want to fire an event. So in fact, it is common practice to do this through a method. So all the way to the bottom of the class, I am going to define a private void onPropertyChanged method that is going to receive a string argument that is going to be called property name. This is the method that we will want to call every time the value from a property changes, and we're going to be passing the name of the property that is changing that value. And in here we're going to fire that event. The event that is called property changed. So to fire the event, all I have to do is write property changed and in parentheses set the sender, which is going to be this, and create a new property changed event arguments that is also going to receive the property name. So I am going to pass the property name that this method is receiving. And now the onPropertyChanged method has to be called from the setter of all of these properties. So I'm going to start with the ID, which by the way doesn't need these equal attributes anymore, neither does the experience. And what I will have to do is define a full version of this property. So this property is a string and it's called ID, and I want to delete it and substitute it with a full property. So I can write prop full, and then I have both the variable and the property. And I change this to be strings, and I set the names. And now, inside of the setter, where I now have a body, because this is the complete definition of a property, I can call the onPropertyChanged event. And I can pass the name of the current property, which is ID. This is exactly what we have to do to each of the properties. For example, for the experience, I am going to copy the name and I am going to delete this and substitute it with a full property. This is also going to be string. This is experience. Paste the name of the property so I don't make any spelling errors. This has to be called exactly the same as before. And in the body of the setter, call the onPropertyChanged event handler and pass the name of this property. The same thing for the venue name, which I have to define as a full property. And in the setter, call the onPropertyChanged. You get the idea. Once you do this for all of the properties, you will have the onPropertyChanged method being called from each and every one of the setters. Remember that you have to pass the name of the current property to the argument of the method. This will trigger the event every time the value for one of these properties changes. Because from this method that we're calling, we're firing the event. The other class where we have to do this is the user class. And the user class is going to be easier because it only has 3 properties. So we're going to implement the iNotify property changed interface, add the using directive, and implement the interface. I will create the method that we created earlier, which is private void onPropertyChanged. Now, of course, the method can be called differently. This is just common practice to call it this way. And it's going to receive a property name. In the body, we're going to fire the property changed event, passing this as the sender, and a new property changed event args as the arguments, which receives the property name in its constructor. And now I need to change the definition from this short version of a property to the full version. And inside of the setter, we have to call the onPropertyChanged method, receiving the value of the name of the property. And the same for the other 3 properties. So now that we have implemented the class and that we are firing the property changed event by calling a method from each and every one of the setters, we can start using these classes from the 2 pages that I mentioned. That is what we are going to do in the next lecture.